Hi, this is Hi, this is Anthony Parent of IRSMedic, and we've been covering Canada's underused property tax. And in our previous episodes, we've talked about what it is, how aggressive it is, some reaction from the United States, from Representative Higgins of New York, and now we're going to dissect it exactly how it works and why the attempts you may be thinking of to defeat this might not work. Joining me is John Richardson and Keith Redmond. John wrote a recent article that I'm going to pull up on my screen here that describes it in pretty quick detail to get right to the point about what we're talking about. John, I got the screen up. So tell me where we want to start here.
I think where we want to start is my summary in italics.
Okay.
And it's funny, I only understood this fully after writing the other three posts. But what it really is Canada's underused housing tax. Now, this is key. Is not a tax imposed because the foreign owner doesn't somehow spend enough time on the property as though it's vacant or something. No. Canada's underused housing tax is a tax imposed because the foreign owner doesn't make the property sufficiently available to non-owners to use. This is amazing stuff, right, when you think about it, right? It's sort of like, we are going to tax you regardless of how much you use your own property on the basis that you don't let other people use it enough. You are not sharing your property enough. And it's amazing how you get there, because I think people misunderstand this tax. I think they have this idea that, if they spend 6 months a year up in Canada on their property, even if they could, that they're going to be exempt from that. And my reading of this, I would love to be proven wrong, but I don't think I am. But I'd love to be proven wrong. My reading of this is that will have no effect on it whatsoever for a very simple reason, okay? The tax applies, again, based on citizenship or immigration status to people who are not Canadian citizens and are not permanent residents of Canada. Therefore, it is basically impossible for this second home in Canada to be the primary residence of these people. And once it's not the primary residence, the occupancy requirement can be satisfied only if other people are given appropriate use of the property for 6 months or more of the year. And my conclusion on this is as follows: that I think that under no circumstances should an American owner of a home in Canada rent it out. They're going to be subject to all these horrible landlord and tenant laws, et cetera, in Ontario. They only have two choices. They either pay the tax or they sell the property. That's it.
Oh, okay. All right. So there's the piece of the puzzle I didn't get, John. The landlord tenant law in
Oh my
Canada.
God. This stuff's insane. Basically, the it's called the Residential Tenancies Act. It essentially transfers the beneficial use and ownership of the property to the tenant. That's what it does. So in
Oh
other
boy.
words, it's renting it out, okay, for 6 months of the year is, only somebody who didn't understand this stuff in the least could possibly come up with a suggestion like that. It's so completely idiotic. So the bottom line is, all right, unless it's in a designated, a tourist area or something, there's a carve out for that, sort of thing. But for the people who are, Congressman Higgins, people who are upset about this, that's not them. These are people who live in Buffalo and, own a property in Port Colborne, Ontario, or, this sort of thing, right? Basically, what they have to understand is that there is no way out. All right, they only have two options, and that is they either accept the additional tax every year or they sell the property. That's it.
Well, what about this exemption that I'm on right here, though? It says if it's if it's only if if your vacation property is in the eligible area.
It has to be in a designated area.
Okay.
Okay.
So have they listed these areas yet?
Yeah. If you were to click on that, you put in a postal code and it will tell you where they're there. But that's
Okay.
going to help some people.
Some
Okay.
people, right. And that's not, I mean, right. And that in my own, understanding, there's a lot of great properties and vacation areas, but if you start adding up the value, that's what you're seeing it all there. There's not the factory in the industrial part of town you're not seeing. You're only seeing what's popular, and it's usually not that much. There's not
That
a lot.
particular thing will help some people, some of the time, but it's not a solution to the problem at all. Okay, it's a carve out for a certain group of people. It's sort of the equivalent would be the dual citizens from birth exemption via exit tax or something, right?
Yeah, I mean that's an
Carve out,
interesting
carve out. It
that
doesn't
that's
really.
an interesting group to carve out. Um, for
Well, what I think is that was probably an attempt. I mean, Congressman Higgins has been, yapping about this since at least 2021, and I think this may have been to throw him a bone.
Okay, all right. So that might be it. Yeah, the little carve out. Yeah, for a
Going
little
to designate
vacation.
certain parts of Canada.
Well, if that's true though, because I remember reading it. I mean, if that was true, that he's concerned about, but I read he's concerned about how this is impacting cross-border economic activity. I don't see how this, exempting some cottages and vacation homes
Oh, it
really
doesn't.
helps that
It
much.
doesn't. It doesn't at
Yeah,
all. There's
yeah, it
nothing.
really doesn't. So this is just a way to get a press release for, on a little old lady. Oh, hey, we helped out this little old lady on this matter, but we screwed her all over the place everywhere else and everyone else.
Well, I think
Um,
that's possible. Another thing that's interesting about the designated area, that exemption is that, you're always talking about regulations versus, statutes. This is not part of the statute. The statute just gives a broad authority to designate certain
okay.
areas. So again, this is something they're just making up on the fly. Now, I think, if Canada wants to, back down on this, what Canada could do without amending its legislation, and maybe this is what Congressman Higgins should request Secretary Blinken to propose to the government of Canada, is that what Canada should do is simply designate any area where a U.S. citizen owns the property as a designated area, right? Wouldn't that solve the problem? Why not?
There you go. Right. It's the regulations. Hey, that's possible. Right. There we go. Hey, Eddie.
Well, they could do it. I mean, nothing is
Yeah.
required. I mean, they just make it up on the fly. So, let's say Congressman Higgins has a constituent, who owns I don't know, property in Fort Erie or Port Colborne. So what they should do is simply call up the government of Canada and say, I own a property here. So would you mind just designating that particular? Here's my postal code. Would you mind designating my postal code as an exempt area?
Mm.
And I promise that I'll spend 28 days there, right? But let me just go over just succinctly in point form, okay, why this is a problem, all right, and why people are going to have to sell, all right, or accept the tax. All right, so first of all, we start from the principle that anybody who's not a Canadian citizen or permanent resident is what's called an affected owner. And by the way, that means they have to file this complicated return, whether they owe a tax or not. And the penalty for not filing the return is $5,000 minimum. So we start from that. Okay. Now, exemptions. All right. So if you own a property in this sort of designated vacation area by postal code, then yes, you file a return, but you're going to be exempted. That may help some people, but it doesn't address the problem that Congressman Higgins is really talking about. Okay. So then we have a situation where if you're not in the designated area, okay, basically there's two ways to be exempt. The first is if the property is used as a primary residence. Now that sounds cool, right? Oh, it's going to be my primary residence. But the problem is, and this is what I'm not seeing in any of the articles. So maybe there's something I'm missing. I don't know, but I don't think so. Okay. The problem is that if the people it's affecting are people who are neither Canadian citizens nor permanent residents, they have no right to live in Canada anyway. So it's very difficult to see how in God's name that type of thing could qualify as a primary residence. In other words, I live primarily in a country I'm not allowed to live in permanently. When at the same time they have their home in Buffalo or Youngstown, New York, or something of this nature. So they're not going to be able to sneak in under the primary residence thing. And then when you look at the other ways to satisfy occupancy, interestingly, what you will see is that it has to be occupied by somebody else. So this is a tax that is imposed if you do not turn your property over to somebody else to live in. I mean, it's incredible. It is incredible. And
Okay.
Anthony, it's all a form of citizenship taxation.
Years ago, I was going to start something called the Third Amendment Law Center. Third Amendment is the quartering of soldiers. Never really has a lot of application. Doesn't have the zing of First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment. But John, this seems like, wait a second. This seems to be a violation of some sort of maybe extended penumbra of the Third Amendment, that you are forcing Americans to rent out their people, not to soldiers, but to tenants, which, according to, which is somewhat warlike when you're a landlord in Canada because of the intense ads. And by the way, I think I think something we should follow up with next week, next episode. I would love to do a video on why you don't want to be a landlord in Canada. I think that deserves
Absolutely, I'm all
a lot of more, because around here, like, there's places you don't want to, a lot of city, it's not a great place where I am to be a landlord. A lot of things are, not so great, where you are forced to let someone stay in your house forever as they destroy it, and you watch everything go by. It's not the greatest place to be a landlord in the United States. And for you to say, oh, you really don't want to be one in Canada, I think we got to do that. I mean, I think that would really give the things, because now what we're forced into is the other thing. Okay. You're going to pay the tax, or you're going to sell the property. But here's some problems you have with selling the property. Very quickly, John, what are the problems that you have with selling the property as a U.S. person?
Well, first of all, you're going to pay a capital gains tax in Canada, okay? Because that's where the property is located. So you're going to pay
Correct.
a capital gains tax in Canada. Yes, you'll be able to get a tax credit, against the U.S. taxpayer, but that's the first problem. The second problem is that, similar to the U.S. FERPTA laws, Canada has, under Section 116 of the Income Tax Act, withholding laws for basically, unless you get a clearance certificate in advance, they're actually, because you're a non-resident vendor, they're actually going to withhold 25% of the purchase price, requiring you to file a tax return. What I think people should do, all right, is, unfortunately, just accept the tax and pay it and don't do anything else. That's their least expensive option.
For a lot of people, right?
I
Just
think that
take
this
it.
is likely to blow over. Okay, it is so incredibly discriminatory and evil. Okay, it is so incredibly discriminatory. I mean, I agree with Congressman Higgins on that point. Okay, I just wish that he understood a little better that the U.S. does this 24/7 to Canada.
And a lot worse, and for a lot longer.
A lot worse, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with him, and I think this is likely to blow over. Okay.
Like blow over and go away, or how are you using the word blow over? Like,
I think it's going to cease to be a problem for, your U.S. citizen living in the Buffalo area who's had a second home in Canada for the last 50 years.
yeah, there'll be a carve out for that, won't there? Yeah.
That problem is going to go away.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I would not. I mean, my view of it is, okay, my advice to U.S. citizens who own properties in Canada or caught into this, I think, would be in no particular order. Okay, number one, I promise you are not going to be able to manage the compliance on this on your own. Okay, so get help. All right, number one. Number two, understand that you do have to file this return, and that there's a $5,000 minimum penalty, and they're just going to put a lien on the property. Okay, so you're not really going to be able to ignore this as a problem. Okay. Next, understand that, assuming you're not in one of those designated areas, okay, you are not going to be able to. This is not a tax based on you're not occupying the property enough as the owner. It's a tax based on you're not making the property available for somebody else to live in. Okay, and I swear to God, all right, under no circumstances should you get into renting that property. Et cetera. It's also set up so you can't Airbnb it if you look at the, regulations, et cetera. But the point is, you leave it the way it is. Any attempt to avoid that tax is going to end up costing you way more than the tax. I promise you. So then you're going to recognize that you're only two options. You're going to pay the tax or you're going to sell the property. And my view of this is you pay the tax for the foreseeable future, because I think this is going to blow over. It's so incredibly well.
Well, hang on, because actually I'm going to ask a question of Keith here, and I think this might be a good time to ask him, because as you're speaking, you're reminding me of something here that kind of drives us three nuts and drives a lot of people nuts. So, Keith, here's the thing. I'm just going to tell you this. Well, Keith, why do I care about Canada? I'm living in the UK. Whatever Canada is, I'm living in the UK, so that's Canada. That's a problem for Canada. So you know what? I really don't care. That's their problem, and let them deal with it. I'm fine. My life is fine, and there's no need for us to unite. We can just continue to be divided, and I'll be focused on more other issues of Americans other than the tax thing that's affecting people horrifically, because my situation isn't all that bad. Keith, what would you say about that?
Well, number one, I would say is this is almost like a contagion. There's no guarantees that what is happening in Canada won't happen in the UK
Thank you.
or any other countries. And the problem is that just because your situation is not being affected today, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be affected tomorrow. And we've had so many examples on how things just get out of hand. A new tax law, a new change. And the Canada situation is a perfect example. I mean, that's the thing. That's why we need to stick together to fight this.
Right, exactly. We all have to stick together, and
it's a contagion.
Right, and exactly, because we did some great content on the France-U.S. treaty, and like, man, it's a pretty good place to retire to. And we kind of explained like how Americans could get out of paying any tax in France, even though they're living there full time. Well, do you think anyone's maybe looking at Canada to say, oh, wait, you know what? Here's some great political fodder. I can just put the same sort of tax, and everyone oh, that's great. We're taxing the foreigners. Great.
Right.
And so they're watching.
What? Yep. You were just saying what I was about to say. Guess what? Other countries watch what other countries are doing.
And if Canada gets away with this against the United States, the other countries are going to try. Hey, look, because in every situation we see, we're always seeing all these countries get rolled over by the government. They all do the will, and like, oh, well, here's one point, and you got to think about the politicians there. They want to look, hey, I'm tough. We're tough against America. So of course, you let them take over your entire banking system, but for something trivial, or that's mostly trivial, you're going to say, yeah, we're for the fight, and we're for the working guy in our country. We're going to tax those foreigners. And it's not looking so good now, because here's the way. Now you might have and it might be something a little different too, because what Canada has done, it says, we could totally discriminate against American property owners. It's totally allowed.
Yeah.
And so that is what's going on here. So I would say anyone, and I know we have a lot of people who consider themselves nomad capitalists. Great, wonderful. Everyone should be saying, get rid of this stuff, because it's killing our opportunities. And that's why we all have to unite under one roof and get rid of citizenship-based taxation. All right, so we joined us. And so this is what I also say too. This is a great time to subscribe to our channel, because we're going to keep you up to date and share this content and try to reach out to, and if we could get some pressure applied, not pressure, well, friendly pressure, to Representative Higgins to get him alerted. If you are in his district, please send him these videos. Please tell him the whole story. We'd love to talk to him. If he would love to be on the channel, we'd love to have him on here, and he can explain his perspective. That'd be wonderful. So with that, now next week we're going to look. Next week we will look into, I think, a couple things. One of them being, why you never want to be a landlord in Canada, and then we might get a little bit more depth into some of these other issues for next week. So again, be sure to subscribe so you're one of the first, and leave your comments below. We get to those. We actually have some of the best followers. We really appreciate your comments, and we get a ton of great advice. And sometimes we get corrected, which does happen. It's little hard to know it all, right? It's U.S. taxation we're talking about. No one can know it all. This is Anthony Parent of IRSMedic, and thank you for watching.